Hey, my name is Caleb Reed. I'm 32, and until a little under 2 years ago, I worked ambulance calls out of the county station in Millbrook, Vermont. Now I run 90 acres of apple trees and a roadside stand my brother started building before he died. And most days, the worst emergency I handle is a broken axle on the cider press. Nothing I can't fix with my own two hands, on my own schedule. That Thursday afternoon in late September, the light was doing that low gold thing it does before the leaves turn, and I was weighing out 3 pounds of macoons for a woman with a toddler on her hip when I saw the car pull onto the gravel shoulder across the road. A gray sedan, parked crooked, like whoever was driving it had stopped thinking about the wheel halfway through the turn. Nobody got out for almost a full minute. I remember that, because I kept glancing over between customers, the old habit from 6 years of scanning rooms for what was wrong before anyone told me. When she finally opened the door, she didn't walk so much as fold herself out of the seat. One hand braced against the frame, the other pressed low against her stomach. 8, maybe 8.5 months along, from the way she carried it. She made it about 10 feet across the gravel before her knees buckled. I was already moving before I'd decided to move. That part of me never really left the ambulance, no matter how many years I spent telling myself it had. I caught her before her head hit the ground, got an arm under her shoulders, eased her down onto the grass at the edge of the lot instead of the gravel. Her skin was clammy under my hand, fast pulse, too fast. Her lips had gone the color of chalk. "Can you hear me?" I kept my voice level, the way I'd been trained to, low and even, no panic in it, even though my own heart was going hard. "I need you to open your eyes for me." Her eyelids fluttered. Somewhere behind me, the woman with the toddler asked if she should call someone, and I told her yes, dial 911, tell them a pregnant woman collapsed at the Reed Orchard stand on Route 9. Then the woman on the grass grabbed my wrist. Her grip was weak, but there was nothing weak in her eyes when they finally focused on mine. "No." Her voice cracked down the middle of the word. "Please, don't call anyone, not—" She stopped, swallowed, tried again. "Don't call my husband's family. Please, they can't know where I am." I held her gaze a second too long, the way you do when someone says something that doesn't fit the moment you thought you were standing in. Then I turned back toward the customer already dialing. "Wait. Hold off a second. I know how that sounds. I know what 6 years of protocol would have told me to do, and it wasn't hold off. But there's a particular kind of fear in a person's eyes that I'd learned to recognize long before I learned to recognize a dropping blood pressure. And this woman had both of them running through her at once, and I wasn't about to make the second one worse by ignoring the first. Her breathing was fast but steady. No blood, no sign of her water breaking, no rigid tightening across her belly that would have told me labor had already started. I got a hand behind her neck, kept her head elevated, told her to breathe with me, in for 4, hold, out for 6, the way I used to talk down panic on calls that had nothing to do with the body at all. Her breathing slowed to match mine before her eyes closed again. Not unconscious this time, just spent. "You're not going into labor," I told her, more to hear myself say it out loud than anything. "Your pulse is coming down, but you're dehydrated, and you've been under some kind of stress your body didn't like. And I want a doctor to look at you regardless of what you decide about hospitals." I paused. "What's your name?" It took her a moment to answer, like she was deciding how much of the truth to hand over to a stranger who'd just caught her falling. "Hannah," she finally said. "Hannah Ashworth." I didn't call an ambulance. What I did instead was carry her to my truck, buckle her in like she was made of glass, and drive 2 miles down Route 9 to Louise Adler's place. The same doctor who'd delivered half the babies in this county, and who I trusted enough to know she wouldn't ask questions she didn't need answered. Hannah didn't argue. She just sat with both hands pressed to her stomach, watching the trees go by. And somewhere around the second mile, she said, "Quiet enough I almost missed it. Thank you for not calling them. You want to tell me who they are?" She didn't answer that. Not yet. Louise had her on the exam table in under a minute. Blood pressure cuff, a urine strip read against the color chart on the box, while she waited on a second reading. "Any headache today? Vision doing anything strange? Spots? Blurring? Pain up under your ribs?" Hannah shook her head to each one. Louise pressed a thumb into the skin over her ankle and watched it spring back instead of holding a dent. Checked her reflexes with the little rubber hammer. Made a note. No protein, no swelling. Reflexes normal. Pressure's coming down now that she's off her feet, she said, half to herself. If one thing on that list had come back different, we'd already be in a car to the hospital. Insurance politics be damned. Then she listened for the baby's heartbeat, and something in the room loosened when the sound came through steady and fast, a little galloping rhythm that made Hannah's eyes go wet before she'd even said anything. "Baby's fine," Louise said. "Strong heartbeat, good movement. You're dehydrated. Your pressure was elevated, but it's settling on its own. And you've had some contractions tight enough to knock you off your feet. But they're not labor. And none of this reads like the kind of emergency that can't wait for a plan. Your body's telling you it's had enough of whatever you've been carrying around." She glanced at me, then back at Hannah. "When's the last time you ate something that wasn't out of a vending machine?" Hannah's laugh came out broken, more air than sound. "Yesterday, maybe. And slept." She didn't answer that one either. Louise didn't push. She handed Hannah a paper cup of water and told her the two things she needed most right now were food and 48 hours without whatever had put that look on her face. Then she looked at me, and I understood the look well enough. She wanted to know if I had somewhere for this woman to go, because it was clear Hannah didn't have anywhere she felt safe going back to. That's how I ended up sitting across a kitchen table from a stranger 2 hours later, watching her eat scrambled eggs like she hadn't seen food in a week, waiting for her to decide how much of her life she was willing to hand over to the man who'd caught her when she fell. She set her fork down before she spoke again. "My husband's name was Peter Ashworth. His family runs Ashworth Freight out of Burlington, trucking and shipping, the kind of company that's been in the family since before the interstate existed." She turned the fork over once, like she needed something to do with her hands. "He died 4 months ago. Car accident, late at night, coming home from his parents' house." I didn't say anything. I just let her keep going, because she looked like a person who'd had enough people talk over her lately. "His mother, Eleanor, she's not a bad person, exactly. That's what makes it so hard to explain. She just lost her son, and I'm the last thing tying her to him. And she's decided that means she gets to control everything that's left of him, including the baby." Her hand went to her stomach without her seeming to notice she'd done it. "There's money, Peter's own estate, plus his vested share of what the family sets aside for grandchildren. The will he wrote years ago named Eleanor and Walter as trustees over all of it until the baby turns 25. At the time, it felt like nothing. His parents in charge of the boring parts. Now it means they control every dollar meant to raise my daughter. And they've had a lawyer drafting an agreement that asks me to accept that in writing. Sign away my right to challenge it in probate court. She wants my signature before the baby comes." Why before? Because right now I'm just Peter's widow contesting a will he wrote before he knew me. The moment she's born, I'm her legal guardian, full standing, and I can walk into that courthouse and ask a judge to remove them as trustees on my own daughter's behalf. Eleanor knows a judge looks harder at a mother fighting for her newborn's inheritance than at a grieving widow arguing on principle. She wants me locked in before that changes. Hannah looked up at me, and there was something raw underneath the exhaustion, something that had been held together with tape for a long time and was finally starting to peel. Today was supposed to be the meeting. She and the lawyer were supposed to be at my apartment at 4 o'clock. I got in my car this morning and drove until I couldn't anymore. And the hospital thing. Why does calling an ambulance mean calling them? Because I'm still on Walter's insurance, since Peter never got around to changing it, and I didn't have the energy to fight that battle on top of everything else. But it's not the paperwork I'm scared of. The Ashworths funded half that hospital's East Wing. Eleanor's on the board. Half the nurses know her by name. And there isn't a triage desk in this county where somebody wouldn't mention seeing me before I even got a room number. She wrapped both hands around the water glass like she needed the weight of it to stay steady. I know how paranoid that sounds. It doesn't sound paranoid. It sounds like you've been paying close attention to people who don't have your best interest in mind. I got up, refilled her glass from the tap, because it gave me somewhere to put my hands that wasn't clenching into fists on her behalf. "You've got somewhere to be tonight?" She looked at the table. "My apartment address is the only one they have. There was a room above the barn that used to be Sam's, back before he talked about turning half the property into a proper cidery, and never got the chance to finish it. I hadn't let anyone stay in it in 2 years. I heard myself offer it to her anyway. Told myself it was the only decent thing to do for a woman 8 months pregnant with nowhere safe to sleep, and didn't examine too closely why some part of me had already decided this wasn't going to be a one-night arrangement. She didn't leave the next morning, or the one after that. I told myself I'd check in with her about a real plan on day 3, and then day 3 arrived and she was out at the stand before I'd finished my coffee, sorting a crate of Cortlands into 2 piles, culls and keepers, moving slow but sure, like her hands needed something to do even when the rest of her was exhausted. "You don't have to do that," I said. "I know." She kept sorting. I also know what it's like to sit in a room by myself, thinking about everything that could go wrong. I'd rather sort apples. I let her stay at the stand that morning, mostly because arguing with a very pregnant, very stubborn woman over apple sorting felt like a fight I was destined to lose. Around noon, while we were both leaning against the counter watching the road for customers who weren't coming, she asked the question I'd been waiting for since the moment she opened her eyes on that patch of grass. "How did you know what to do? Yesterday. You didn't even hesitate. I used to run ambulance calls. 6 years, out of the county station." Used to. I picked up an apple, turned it over, set it back down, the kind of fidgeting I did when a question landed somewhere I didn't visit often. "My younger brother, Sam, he ran this place before me. He was out here alone working the old tractor 2 years back, hit a slope wrong, and it rolled. I was on shift that night. I was the one who answered the call before I even knew whose address it was." My voice went flat, the way it always did around this part. "I got there in 11 minutes. That's fast. That's good, by every measure they teach you." It wasn't fast enough. Hannah didn't say she was sorry. She didn't reach for my hand or fill the silence with something soft and useless. She just stood there next to me, letting the quiet hold what it needed to hold. And somehow that did more than any of the things people usually said. "I quit 4 months after the funeral," I went on, "because once I'd started I found I didn't want to stop. Told myself I was taking over the orchard because somebody had to, because Sam had already ordered half the equipment for the cidery, and it seemed wrong to let it rot in a shed. That's true. It's just not the whole truth. The whole truth is I couldn't get back in an ambulance and trust myself to be fast enough for the next person. So I came out here, where the worst thing I have to be fast about is picking apples before a frost." "That's not nothing," Hannah said. "Being fast enough for one person doesn't undo not being fast enough for another. You know that, right?" "I'm working on knowing it." She smiled, small and a little sad, and for a second neither of us said anything else, and the quiet between us didn't feel like the kind either of us needed to fill. That evening, After the stand closed, she found me out by the old maple near the barn, refilling a bird feeder Sam used to keep hanging on the lowest branch. "You still do that?" she asked, arms crossed loosely over her stomach, watching a small brown and white bird dart in and dip toward the seed. "Every spring, a wren builds a nest in the knot up there." I pointed at a gap in the bark, worn smooth by years of tiny claws. "Sam used to say it was the same bird coming back, though I doubt that's true. Birds that size don't usually live that long." He liked believing it anyway. Hannah watched the wren for a long moment, quiet in a way that didn't feel heavy. "I like that he believed it," she said. "Some things are worth believing even when you're not sure they're true." I didn't have an answer for that, so I handed her the rest of the seed and let her fill the feeder herself, careful with something so small. For a few minutes, neither of us said anything about lawyers or trust documents or the black car that might come rolling up the drive one of these mornings. The location came from her own phone. Hannah figured that out 3 days in, scrolling through settings with a frown creasing her forehead, and swore under her breath when she found the family sharing app Peter had set up the month she found out she was pregnant, back when it had felt like a kindness instead of a leash. She switched it off right there at the counter, but it was already too late. Eleanor Ashworth's car turned into the gravel lot the following afternoon, a black Audi that looked as out of place among the apple crates as a swan in a duck pond. A man in a gray suit got out first, carrying a leather folder against his chest like a shield. Eleanor followed a beat behind him, and even from 30 feet away I could see the particular kind of composure that comes from a person who's never once had to raise her voice to get what she wants. Hannah went very still beside me. "That's her," she said, "and that's Foster, their lawyer." "Go inside," I told her. "I've got this." "Caleb, go inside, please." She hesitated a second too long for my liking, then disappeared through the side door of the barn, and I turned to face 2 people walking toward me across my own gravel like they already owned it. Eleanor didn't bother with hello. "I'm looking for my daughter-in-law. I have reason to believe she's been staying on this property." "You're on private land, and you're harboring a woman who walked out on a legal meeting concerning her unborn child's future." Her voice never rose. That was the unsettling part, how level it stayed, like she was reading off a shipping manifest instead of threatening a stranger. "I don't know what she's told you. I don't know what kind of man makes a habit of taking in pregnant strangers off the side of the road, but I'd think carefully before deciding this is any of your business." She collapsed in my parking lot. That made it my business the second it happened. I kept my hands loose at my sides, kept my voice even, all the training that used to be for calming down accident scenes instead of my own temper. "She's an adult. If she wants to talk to you, she knows where to find you. If she doesn't, you're trespassing, and I'd like you to leave." Foster Lang cleared his throat like he'd been waiting for his cue. "Mr. Reed, is it? You should know that interfering with a pending probate matter can carry legal consequences of its own. We'd hate for a misunderstanding to cost you this." He glanced around at the stand, the crates, the faded sign over the barn door. Operation. There it was, the threat under the threat. I thought about the loan I still owed on the cider equipment, the note at the bank that Sam had signed before he died, and I'd been quietly paying down for 2 years, and I understood exactly what kind of leverage a company like Ashworth Freight could bring to bear on a small-town bank if it wanted to. "I'd think carefully before you decide that's a road you want to go down," I said, echoing her own words back at her, and something flickered across Eleanor's face, gone before I could name it. "You want your grandchild to grow up hearing that story. That grandma tried to bankrupt the man who caught her mother when she collapsed on the side of the road?" Eleanor's jaw tightened. "You don't understand what's at stake." "Then explain it to me instead of threatening me." For just a second, something in her posture cracked, some hairline fracture under all that composure, and I caught a glimpse of a woman who looked less like a corporate matriarch and more like someone standing at the edge of a grief she hadn't found the bottom of yet. Then it was gone, and the composure slid back into place like a door closing. "The signing meeting is in 3 weeks," she said, "before the baby comes. I won't let her throw away my grandchild's future because she's decided to hide in an orchard with a man she met 4 days ago. And if she thinks refusing to sign ends this, she's wrong. I can still go to family court and put on the record exactly how this looks. A widow, 9 months pregnant, moving in with a stranger before the memorial cards were printed. She won't lose that fight on the law. She'll lose it because a judge only hears one version before he makes up his mind, and I intend to tell it first." She turned back toward the car, Foster trailing behind her like a shadow. At the door, she paused. "Tell her I'll be in touch." They drove off in a spray of gravel, and I stood there a long moment before I went to find Hannah, who was sitting on the bottom step of the barn stairs with her arms wrapped around her knees as much as they'd go around anymore, listening to every word through the thin wall. 3 weeks, she said, before I'd even reached the bottom step. She's not wrong about the timeline. My due date's in 26 days. I sat down beside her, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. Then we've got 26 days to figure out how to stop this. You didn't think I was going to hand you a room and then wash my hands of the rest of it. Something in her face loosened, just slightly, like she'd been braced for me to say something else. "Peter was trying to leave the company," she said, quiet, like she was testing whether the words still hurt the way they used to. "Before he died, he'd been fighting with Walter for months about it, wanted to start something smaller, something that was actually his instead of just the next name on the letterhead. The night of the accident, he'd gone to tell his parents he was done, that we were done with all of it. He never told me exactly how that conversation went. I found out about the fight secondhand, from his assistant, weeks after the funeral. Her hands twisted together in her lap. He was supposed to come home and tell me everything. He said he had something else to tell me too, something he'd been working on. I never got to hear what it was. I filed that away without saying anything, because pulling on that thread felt like something I needed to do carefully, not out loud, not yet. What I said instead was, "I know a lawyer, Warren Locke. He used to work with my brother back before either of us took over out here. He's mostly retired now, but he still takes on a case here and there. I could call him tomorrow, see what he thinks about the trust language, see if there's a way to buy you more time." "Okay, I could set it up so you don't even have to be in the room for the first call, if that's easier." She looked at me sideways. "Caleb, what? You're doing the thing again. What thing? Deciding things for me because you think it'll protect me from having to deal with it myself." Her voice wasn't sharp exactly, but there was an edge under the tiredness that hadn't been there a minute ago. "That's what Eleanor does. She decides what's best for me, and then acts like she's already asked my permission. I've had 4 months of people deciding things are too much for me to handle. I don't need it from you too." I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it again, because some part of me knew she wasn't wrong even before I'd finished being annoyed about it. "You're right," I said finally. "I'm sorry. Call him with me tomorrow. Both of us. Your call, how much you want to say." She studied me for a second, like she was deciding whether the apology was going to stick. "Thank you," she said, and let her head rest against my shoulder for just a moment before she caught herself and sat back up, like she'd surprised herself by leaning at all. Warren Locke had a voice like a rock tumbling downhill, all gravel and momentum, and when I explained the situation over speakerphone the next morning, he went quiet in a way that told me he was already 3 steps ahead of us. Wills get quietly rewritten all the time, and if Peter changed his mind after he wrote that one, it wouldn't be the first will that never made it back to the family's usual attorney, he said. I'll need to see the document Eleanor's lawyer is citing, not just take his word for what's in it. And Hannah, I want to know everything about the last few months of Peter's life that you can remember, even the parts that don't seem important. Sometimes the important part is buried in the boring part. His assistant might know more, Hannah said. Della, she worked with him for years. She might still have some of his files from before he cleaned out his office. Get me her number. Warren's chair creaked on the other end of the line. In the meantime, don't sign anything. Don't meet with them alone. And Hannah, if anyone from that family shows up anywhere near you without me or Caleb in the room, say nothing and leave. We hung up with a plan that felt thinner than either of us wanted to admit. And for 4 days it held. Hannah answered emails from Della, dug through old photos looking for anything Peter might have mentioned about paperwork, a lawyer, a change he was making. Warren called twice with nothing new. The due date crept closer every time either of us looked at the calendar. On the 5th day, Hannah drove herself into town for a prenatal checkup she refused to let me reschedule around my own nerves, and I was elbow-deep in the cider press when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Reed?" A woman's voice, tight, fast. "This is Louise's receptionist. You need to come now. There's a situation in the waiting room." I don't remember the drive. I remember pulling into the clinic lot and seeing Foster Lang standing just inside the glass doors with that leather folder clutched against his chest, and Hannah backed into a corner by the water cooler, one hand braced against the wall, the other pressed hard against her stomach, her breathing coming in short, uneven pulls I recognized before I was even through the door. "She's not signing anything without proper counsel present. And you know that," Louise was saying, planted between Hannah and the lawyer like a wall with a stethoscope around its neck. "I only came to deliver the updated paperwork," Foster said, in the tone of a man who knew exactly how untrue that sounded. I didn't say anything to him. I crossed the room and crouched in front of Hannah, put both hands loosely on her shoulders, kept my voice at the same low, even register I'd used on the side of the road 9 days ago. "Hey, look at me. In for 4. Caleb." Her voice was thin, panicked, nothing like the steady woman who'd sorted apples on my counter 3 mornings running. "In for 4. I'm right here. Nothing's happening to you or the baby right now, except your body panicking because a man in a suit walked in holding paperwork. I need you breathing with me before we do anything else." I held her eyes, counted out loud, felt her ribs start to rise and fall in time with mine instead of against it. It took almost 2 full minutes before her shoulders dropped and the color started coming back into her face. "Braxton Hicks again," Louise confirmed a few minutes later, blood pressure cuff already in hand, running through the same short list as before out of habit, headache, vision, swelling, and finding nothing new. Sharper than the last time, which tells me her body's had about all the stress it can absorb before it starts sending up flares. She needs this to stop, soon. I turned to Foster, who had the decency to look uncomfortable at least. "You're going to leave," I said, "and you're going to tell Eleanor that if anyone from your family shows up anywhere near Hannah without going through her attorney first, I will make sure every reporter in this county knows exactly how Ashworth Freight likes to handle grieving pregnant women." Foster left without another word. Hannah's hand found mine somewhere in the middle of all of it, and didn't let go. Not in the waiting room, not in the truck on the way home, not until we were sitting on the porch steps back at the orchard, with the last of the light going gold over the trees, and both of us too wrung out to say much of anything at all. I keep thinking about what she said. Hannah's voice was quiet in the dark, her hand still resting in mine, that I'm throwing away my grandchild's future, like wanting to raise my own daughter without someone else's hand on the back of my neck the whole time, is some kind of selfishness. It's not. I know that. I do. But some nights I lie awake and think, what if I'm wrong? What if Eleanor really could give her more than I can? Money, stability, 2 parents' worth of family instead of just me. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she pressed the heel of her free hand against her eyes like she could push the tears back in by force. Peter's gone. I don't have anyone else. What if I'm not enough? Hannah. I turned toward her on the step, waited until she looked at me. You held a breathing pattern together in a waiting room an hour ago, while a man in an expensive suit tried to hand you a contract that would hand your daughter's whole inheritance over to people who think a signature fixes grief. You've been running on no sleep and too much fear for 4 months, and you still get up every morning and choose her. That's not almost enough. That's everything a kid could need. You don't know that. I know what it looks like when someone shows up for a person, even when it costs them something. I watched my brother do it his whole life, right up until the day it cost him everything. And I know what it looks like when someone doesn't. I stopped, made myself keep going even though my chest had gone tight around the words. I spent 2 years telling myself I wasn't fast enough for Sam. And maybe I wasn't. Maybe there wasn't a version of that night where I got there in time no matter what I did. But you were fast enough today. You didn't fall apart. You breathed, and you fought, and you didn't sign a single thing they put in front of you. Don't let her convince you that's not enough, because from where I'm sitting, it's the only thing that's ever mattered. Hannah was crying now, quiet, the kind that comes from somewhere deeper than the last hour. Why do you care this much? You met me 9 days ago. You didn't sign up for any of this. No, I didn't. I reached up, brushed a tear off her cheek with my thumb. The same unhurried care I'd have used checking a pulse, except my heart wasn't anywhere near steady while I did it. But I keep waking up wanting to. Every morning since you got here, I wake up and the first thing I think about is whether you slept, whether the baby's still kicking the way she was the night before, whether today's the day someone tries to take that away from you. That's not something I do for people I only feel sorry for. She went very still. Caleb, you don't have to say anything back. I just needed you to know it wasn't only about the orchard or the room above the barn or proving something to myself about the calls I couldn't answer fast enough. It's you. It's been you since you grabbed my wrist on that patch of grass and told me not to call anyone. And I understood right then that whoever you were running from, I wasn't going to be one more person who let you down. She kissed me first. I'd like to say I made the first move, that I was brave enough to close that distance myself. But the truth is, she leaned in before I'd finished deciding whether I had any right to, and for a long moment neither of us thought about trust documents or due dates, or the black Audi that might come back down the gravel road again before this was over. There was just the porch, and the last of the light, and her hand still holding mine like she wasn't ready to let it go. Della called 2 days later. Warren patched her into a 3-way line from his office. Peter asked me to help him find an estate attorney, she said. Someone outside the family's usual firm, in Burlington. Someone his father had never worked with. I didn't ask why. I made the call and forgot about it. It wasn't until Warren's office asked yesterday whether Peter had mentioned changing anything that I remembered. I called the attorney this morning and learned that Peter had signed a new will 3 days before the accident. Papers shuffled somewhere on her end. It revokes the old one and names Hannah sole trustee and executor over everything meant for the child. No conditions, no family oversight clause. I have the attorney's name and number right here. Hannah's hand found mine across the kitchen table before Della had even finished the sentence. Warren had the document by the end of the week, notarized, witnessed, sitting quietly in another attorney's office the entire time Eleanor had been drafting an agreement built on a will Peter had already replaced. Whether Eleanor knew about the new will and had been racing to override it before anyone found it, or whether she genuinely didn't know her son had already made his choice, Warren said we might never know for certain. What we did know was that it didn't matter anymore. She came to the orchard one last time, alone, without Foster, without the Audie's usual polish, and stood in the gravel lot, looking smaller than she had the first time. "I'm not signing anything," Hannah told her, before Eleanor could start. "Before he died, Peter made his decision, and I have the paperwork to prove it." Eleanor's composure didn't crack this time so much as it simply set down, like something too heavy to keep carrying. "I know," she said. "Warren called Walter yesterday. I've seen it." She looked past Hannah, toward the barn, the orchard rose going gold and bare beyond it. "I'm not going to pretend I did this well. I lost my son, and I decided the only way to keep any piece of him was to control what was left. That was never going to work. I think some part of me knew it the whole time and kept going anyway." Her eyes came back to Hannah, and for the first time since I'd met her, there was nothing performed in them at all. "I'd like to know my grandchild, not as her trustee, just as her grandmother, if you'll let me be that, on your terms, whenever you're ready." Hannah didn't answer right away, but she didn't say no either, and that felt, for the moment, like enough. I used to think being fast enough was the only kind of showing up that counted, that if I couldn't beat the clock, I had no business being in the room at all. I know better now. Some things you can't outrun, and some things you're not meant to fix alone, and the only real failure is deciding that means you shouldn't stay. Hannah went into labor 11 days later, on a Tuesday, with the first frost of the year silvering the orchard rose outside Louisa's window. I stood by the bed for 6 hours doing the one thing I actually knew how to do without flinching, keeping her breathing steady, in for 4, out for 6, until a very small, very loud girl arrived just after midnight. Hannah held her against her chest, exhausted and glowing and crying all at once, and looked up at me like she was asking permission for something she didn't actually need permission for anymore. "There's a wren that nests in the old tree by the barn every spring," she said. "Sam's tree, you told me. I want her middle name to be Wren." "Yeah? Yeah, something that comes back every year, no matter what." I looked down at the baby, at the two of them, at the whole life I hadn't known I was walking into the afternoon a stranger collapsed in my parking lot, and I didn't have anything clever left to say. So I just said the only thing that was true. "Welcome home."